Okay. Right. Okay, so here is another live stream. Okay. So I said I'd start at 7 and I'm starting at 7 and I think there aren't a lot of people yet. So, but I'll start. Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome to, I don't know, is this a podcast? Is this a live stream? Is it a vlog? I don't know. But welcome to my podcast, and this is a podcast where I will talk about anything and everything. Talk about the mundane and the exciting, the boring and the weird. I'll talk about everything: books, movies, sports, skincare, or whatever. I'll talk about anything as long as nasa mood ako. Okay. So my name is Viva, and I'm a little girl with a big voice, and you'll probably be spending an hour or 2 hours with me, so that, talking about a lot of things that I decided to talk about. Okay, so the topic for today is the BF homes. I was inspired by, there's a lot of YouTube videos about, ghosts and horror stories. I love BuzzFeed Unsolved, so I got inspired to talk about BF Homes, which is the suburb that I grew up in. I was born I wasn't born in BF Homes, but I was rather born in a hospital in Las Piñas, but I grew up in BF Homes. So we used to have a house along Tropical Avenue, which is one of the main avenues here in BF Homes. Spent probably around about, 2 decades, 3 decades living in that house. We don't have that house now, which is another story and another podcast session probably. But I have spent a huge portion of my life there, and I've heard a lot of stories about BF Homes, like really creepy stories. So I'll probably be sharing these stories to you guys, and you know how it is with ghost stories. It's probably like, it's usually like a friend of a friend, or somebody told someone, or it's very rare that these stories are first-hand experiences. So, and make sure to take these stories with a grain of salt. Not a grain of salt, a whole ass teaspoon of salt, like a fucking bowl of salt. Probably a lot of these have a certain kernel of truth in them, but most of them are probably urban legends. But I am pretty sure that one or two of the stories that I'm going to relate to you guys probably are based on fact, even though a lot of things in these stories are probably fictional as well. But anyway, so yes, BF Homes. I know that if you guys are from the South, it is likely that you either live inside BF Homes or you live close to BF Homes, because BF Homes is a huge gated middle class subdivision. So it has a land area of at least 765 hectares, and it actually sprawls in, it's so big that it covers 3 cities. So a part of it is in Parañaque, some parts of it are in Las Piñas, and even in Muntinlupa. So it's huge. It's actually it's a third of Makati. So ganun siya kalaki. So it's really huge. So some facts about BF Homes before I talk about the ghost story. So this subdivision actually has more than 12,000 households. So it has an estimated 75,000 residents. So I'm actually reading from the fast facts that the BF Homes page has. So I'm just talking about BF Homes Parañaque. I'll probably be talking about BF International as well, not BF Resort, because that's across, right across the other side over there. But BF Homes Parañaque and BF Homes International, usually since magkadikit sila, their stories usually mix up. So it's huge. It's actually the biggest subdivision. It's named the biggest subdivision in Asia. It's that huge. There are 82 enclaves. So by enclaves, we mean like the tiny subdivision, like the tiny mini subdivisions inside the actual BF Home subdivision. So, it's actually one of the first gated subdivisions in the Philippines, and it was so posh dati when they started developing it, that it's actually one of the first subdivisions to have its own movie house built with a bowling alley. Okay, so an interesting fact. So if you guys live in BF Homes, alam niyo yung behind Jollibee and along Aguirre Avenue is the very famous night market or night spot called the Ruins, right? So the reason that it's called the Ruins is because it used to be Torama Theater. It's a movie house, and it also had a bowling alley. And the reason why it's called the Ruins kasi pinagiba siya, and and they never really built anything over it again. So now it became the Ruins. So BF, I think a lot of you guys already know this fact, but just in case you don't know, BF is an acronym of Banco Filipino, and it's the parent company of the BF Homes developer, BF Homes. Wala yung H ko, kapampangan lang. BF Homes Incorporated. So this land was developed round about late 60s. It saw some people moving in 70s, 80s, right? So yun yung mga kasagsagan ng the Marcos. It was the tailgate of the Marcos era. So don't be surprised if a lot of the names in BF Homes are actually cabinet members or very important people during the Marcos regime or the Marcos era. So if you want to know the who's who of the Marcos era, just look at the streets in BF. All the dignitaries, luminaries during that time, they have a street in BF. Actually, kaya nga kilala ko sila Cesar Virata, even though I don't have the cabinet yung cabinet or senate nung panahon ni Marcos, because I know them because they're a street in BF. Kind of like yung BF Resort, where you will accidentally memorize all the beauty queens in the Filipino beauty queens in the Philippines kasi their names are streets in BF Resort. And yes, if you're asking, does Ninoy Aquino have a street in BF Homes? Yes, there is Ninoy Aquino. Even though he was a very popular, he was considered one of the biggest political rivals of the Marcoses during that time. He still has a street in BF Homes, Parañaque. Very big place. There are several main roads in BF. So there's El Grande, Tropical Avenue, Palace Street, and and the reason that they're called these streets is because they're actually named after the 4-star hotels. So it's that big. So BF used to have two, not just one, 2 4-star hotels inside of it, and along Phase 3. So the first one was called the El Grande Hotel, which completely burned down. They never really built it. And the second hotel is called the Tropical Palace Hotel, which was half burned, which is actually the first story that we're going to talk about. So one of the more famous ghost stories in BF is the ghosts of Tropical Palace. Hey, now Tropical Palace, as I've just told you guys, it's a 4-star hotel. So it was, according to the articles, it was once a sprawling hotel. It was burned down in 1985, so that was a year after I was born. And it was home to the Miss Universe contestants of 1974. So it saw a lot of pretty popular popular people back then. If you guys don't know, the Miss Universe pageant in 1974 was held in the Philippines, and yun yung pageant na Margie Moran gave the crown to, I think it was Amparo Munoz of Spain. I know this because I googled it, and not because I have that stock knowledge. I'm not that good. But anyway, so during that time, Anna Bjornsdottir of Iceland was the won the Miss Congeniality Award, and the best national costume was given to Kim JQ of Korea. So yay. Um, so during that time, so it's huge. It was I tried to look for photos of the Tropical Palace Hotel, but I couldn't find anything, actually, mysteriously enough. But this is a weird thing kasi oddly enough, the LA Times published an article way back in 1986 that so let me just bring up that article right now. So the LA Times published a it's not even an article, it is literally just 2 sentences. So they published an article in July 1, 1986 that a fire gutted the 168-room Tropical Palace Hotel in the Manila suburb of Parañaque on Monday. There were no immediate reports of injuries, and the cause of the blaze was not known. So 168 rooms. So imagine mo kung gaano kalaki yan. So that's probably like probably close to Dusit hotel size. So it was very big. It was very luxurious kasi I couldn't find photos, but I got second-hand accounts lang online about what it looked like. So the theme was tropical, lots of plants, a very old school, parang mga rattan furniture, ganun yung style niya. So, but anyway, nobody knew what caused the fire, and I think they never really got, kasi during those years na pabagsak na yung Bangko Filipino because there were a lot of the members of the board were either Marcos cronies or were at least very close. Their fortunes were very close to the Marcoses. So since nangyayari na yon, na-distract ako kay Bene. Hi, Bene. Hi po, Ma'am Viva. More power and God bless po. Regards from Santa Mesa. I think, parang na-weirdohan ako kasi you are one of the more napaka-konyo mo magsalita, tas ang weird ng message na to. So, natawa lang ako. But anyway, oh my God, where was I? I completely lost my train of thought. But anyway, nobody knew how the fire started, and they never really rebuilt it because during that time, may mga chismis na nagkakagulo na yung mga board members ng Bangko Filipino. The Marcoses were already on their way out. Out of the country, out of power, ganyan, kasi talks of revolution were already happening. So, nagkakagulo na. So, they never really got the time as well as the funds, I think, because nga nagkakagulo na within Bangko Filipino. So, they never really rebuilt that. Now, the thing about it is that the reason why there are so many stories of ghosts kasi apparently, and there are different accounts pero one of the stories that I heard about Tropical Palace is that there were apparently, I don't know if it's a family or may nag-field trip na mga bata dun sa hotel, and when it burned down, nasama sila. So right now, if you've ever been to, kasi Tropical Palace, kasi when you go to BF, Tropical Palace is actually out of the way. So it's not on the main road. You have to turn right if you're coming from or dediretso ka if you're coming from Southland, or turn right if you're coming from Elizalde, or turn left if you're coming from El Grande. I'm sorry, am I making sense? Yeah. So it's medyo tago siya, and that area right now is just full of trees. Very creepy kasi wala siya gaanong lights at night. They only have lights, pero yung houses lang ang may lights. And most of those houses are not really occupied now. Some are just occupied by businesses, and the people who have businesses there usually don't stay over the night. So nagkaroon na ng when it burned down, ang alam ko, when it burned down, it didn't have those ghost stories yet, pero nagkaroon ng ghost stories after some time when people started saying that, they could hear children laughing during the night or children crying, children crossing the road. It was just, so that's the reason, I tried to look up articles saying na, if there were children that were part of the kung may nasamang, families or children. Pero according to the articles, nobody was really harmed. So there is probably no truth to this particular ghost story. But the creepy part is that hindi siya ang creepy kasi sa kanya is the actual location. So it's not really the stories. Kasi the stories are actually very vague. The stories are just like, there at night you will hear children playing or children crying kasi the story is na nasama sila dun sa sunog. Pero more than the story, I think the creepy part of this is the actual location kasi pag gabi talaga wala siyang ilaw. When you drive by, it's pitch black. It's really pitch black. And the fact that madami siyang puno, so when you drive by, you have these really creepy shadows on. So you don't really, and you don't really know kung namalikmata ka lang or may nakita ka talaga sa side ng mirror. So some people put it as a favorite ghost hunting spot. Some people, before I think it was popular na aside from driving at night, some people park their cars and just to walk along there to give themselves a good scare. I know that the roving guards now discourage that. Kasi nga, parang baka mapano sila doon. Diba? And I think, unti-unti nang nare-reclaim yung area na yun kasi nagkakaroon na ng businesses, like people, like Mama Lou's, the restaurant, the famous Italian restaurant, is on the corner. I know na some of, I think some people have built houses. There's a Korean church na on that area. So it's not as creepy during the daytime. Pag daytime, it's actually very quiet. At saka malamig siya because of the trees. Pero at nighttime, it's still really creepy because nobody really, the BF Homes never really put the effort of like putting in lights there. So Bene says that's true. Before we used to drive there and turn off our headlights to scare ourselves. Actually, ginawa ko na yun. Ginawa na sa akin ng tito ko yun and I hated my uncle so bad kasi I was so young. And then nag-drive kami doon kasi pauwi na kami since we live in Tropical Avenue. Coming from Elizalde, ginawa niya. Kumanan siya and then he parked the car and turned off the light. I literally screamed. I was so angry. But now, I'm the one that does it to other people. Because why not? All this time, ini-imagine ko yung elementary voice mo pa rin. Hi, RD, shout out to RD, who is my grade schoolmate in St. James, Parañaque. Anyway, but yes, Tropical Palace, the ghosts of Tropical Palace, probably not true. The fact that it burned down is true, but the ghosts of those dead children are probably not true. Okay? Now, the next one. So, since we're talking about Tropical Palace, pag diniretso mo yung Tropical Palace, so that's the big avenue where I used to live, which is Tropical Avenue. Okay? It's a very, it's a very, very long road. How long is that road? So, Tropical Avenue actually stretches from Montessori de Manila. So, it starts from Montessori de Manila and it's up until Southville International College. So, it's a very long road. So, from Montessori to Southville. So, school to school. So it has a lot of, it's not as developed as Aguirre. So Aguirre Avenue is one of the, it runs parallel along, half of it runs parallel along Aguirre. It's not as bustling and it's not as, it doesn't have a nightlife like Aguirre Avenue. So it's mostly houses talaga. Since I live along that stretch, when I was young, actually, wala pa halos bahay yung Tropical Avenue, lalo na yung part na papuntang Southville. Yung may mga bahay lang is like a certain, siguro mga 1/4 or 1/5 lang ng road na yon yung may actual na bahay. But yung long stretch na yon, halos mabibilang mo lang yung bahay doon sa road na yon. We were actually one of the first few houses that were in there. Or one of the first few households that had a house there. So, one of my favorites, one of the stories that I used to remember as a child is that there is a house in Tropical Avenue. It was pretty, back then, I remember hearing this story mga 90s or early 80s. So, back then, nung konti pa lang yung bahay, this house was the farthest, as in isolated siya. Siya yung dulong house sa Tropical Avenue. Wala pang Southville nito dati. So, siya yung dulong house sa Tropical Avenue. Tapos, wala siyang katabing bahay. Tapos, yung likod niya din, bakanting lote. Yung harap niya, bakanting lote. Like, literally, that house just stood alone at the end of Tropical Avenue. So, diba? The house at the end of Tropical Avenue. So, dati kasi, in BF, the security guards used to rove using, nagbabike sila. So, they didn't have motorcycles, they didn't have yung pangronda na L300. So, they used to just bike around the subdivision. And since dati, we used to have a lot of kasama sa bahay, yung mga boy, yung mga house help. So, every evening, nakikipag-inuman sila sa mga security guard ng BF Homes. So, parang some of the security guards would drop by our house and then nakikipag-inuman sila sa mga kasambahay namin. One of the stories that the security guard, or actually several security guards, told the same story to our house, yung sa mga kasambahay namin. Yung kasambahay namin, every time na parang, di ba nung early 90s popular yung brownout, di ba? So every time na nagba-brown out, yung brownout dati nung 90s, hindi siya yung 30-minute brownout, like literal scheduled brownout siya na every 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. wala kayong kuryente, and that's like every day. So if you guys were born late 90s or early 2000s, count yourself lucky na hindi nyo naabutan yung brownout era ng Pilipinas nung 1990s. But anyway, so during yung pag nag-brownout na, yung mga kasambahay namin, they were, mahilig silang magkwento ng mga nakakatakot. Kasi nga, di ba, syempre, brownout, tas you only have candles. So, they usually, I used to hang out dun sa kusina, where, kung nasan yung mga kasambahay namin dati, or used to hang out in their room. So, nagkikwentuhan sila, and I used to listen. And one of the more popular stories that they told, there was that house, diba? So that house, it was in the end of Tropical Avenue, and it didn't have it didn't have any neighbors, wala siyang katabi. So ang nangyayari, ang story here is that may mag-asawa, and the husband was actually an OFW. So yun yung kasagsagan ng Saudi OFWs pa. So that was yung ito pa yung early years ng mga Saudi OFW. So the husband was a Saudi OFW, and iniwan niya yung wife niya sa Pilipinas. So the thing about it is that mag-isa lang yung asawa niya. Ang kasama lang ng asawa niya is yung driver nila. So, apparently, the wife and the driver had an affair. Now, for some weird reason, nalaman nung lalaki parang nabalitaan nung lalaki sa Saudi. So, what he did was that, he got super angry, right? So, what he did was that he paid someone, I think, 20,000, 30,000 pesos. Back then in 1980s, diba? Parang, that was a huge sum of money. So he paid some, mga 20,000, 30,000 pesos, na looban yung bahay to go inside the house. And what that person did was that, nilooban niya yung bahay, he tied the woman tinali niya yung babae. So, one side ng room, tinali niya yung driver. So, one side ng room, so magkatapat sila. And then, he shot the driver in the head, and then afterwards, he also shot the woman in the head. So nangyari, parang, since walang katabing bahay, even though, yun nga, nagmamakaawa yung babae, and, like, the man was also, the driver was also begging for their life. Since wala nga silang katabing bahay, and at the same time, during that time, wala halos bahay sa Tropical Avenue. Nobody heard what was happening in their house. So, what happened afterwards is that, I think, hindi na bumalik ng Pilipinas yung lalaki. So, he never was really caught. Nalaman lang nila yung story na yon. Apparently, it's because ang nahuli is yung binayaran para pumatay dun sa babae at saka sa driver niya. So, nag-confess yon, and then nakulong siya. Pero yung lalaki, he was, hindi na siya bumalik ng Pilipinas. So, hindi na siya nahuli. So, that house was sold. Parang ginawa siyang for sale. But nobody really bought it. And then, the security guards say that every time that medyo maulan, hindi naman yung bagyo, pero every time that there's a light drizzle and then they pass by that house, they can hear a woman crying for help. Like, humahagulgol na iyak. Nagmamakaawa para sa tulong. And this story, I know that I kept hearing this story during the early 90s sa BF Homes. I tried to look it up earlier. I tried to look for murders or cases in BF Homes that happened in Tropical Avenue. I couldn't find an article. So, it could be possible that this is not true. But I know that house. I know that house personally kasi I used to pass by that house. Kasi it's not just, there's this random house. Hindi. Kasi sobrang specific ng house na yun. Kasi tinuro talaga sa amin kung ano yung bahay. And I know for a fact na it's still for sale. Nobody still lives there. Nobody has bought that house. That house has not changed since the 1990s. And nobody lives there. There is still a sign that says for sale. So, is it real? Is the ghost story real? Is there really a ghost there? Did somebody get murdered in that house? Nobody really knows. I don't see any articles about it, but just in case you pass by Tropical Avenue and it's raining, try to listen carefully if there is a woman that is crying and asking for help. It could be that house. Okay, so that's one of the ghosts in Tropical Avenue. Now, speaking of the ghosts in Tropical Avenue, there is also another house that's famous for a ghost. And it's really weird kasi this ghost is actually a very famous person. So, as you guys might know, so one of the most hated people in the Philippines right now is Cynthia Aguilar Villar. Okay. So, actually, she's called Cynthia Villar now kasi she married si Manuel, or otherwise the more popularly known Manny Villar. But her maiden name is Cynthia Aguilar. She's actually the oldest among 4 children. So, there's her, Cynthia Aguilar. There's Virgel Aguilar, who was the former mayor of Las Piñas. I think he passed away now. Ang kapatid, yung sunod sa kanya is si Imelda Tobias Aguilar, which is the current mayor of Las Piñas right now. And then the youngest is Elizabeth Aguilar Masangkay, who is actually a barangay captain. So, Cynthia Aguilar is actually the daughter of the former mayor of Las Piñas, and his name is Filemon Aguilar. If you live in Las Piñas, especially in BF International, or you've lived in Las Piñas for some time, Filemon Aguilar is the first Aguilar that he started the Aguilar dynasty in Las Piñas, and he is called locally sa Las Piñas, ang tawag sa kanya Matandang Aguilar. Kasi siya yung, he was the first Aguilar, and I think, parang he reached the age of 80 or 90. Basta, every time somebody says, yung Matandang Aguilar, it's Philemon Aguilar. So, they have several properties around Las Piñas. They're very rich. And one of the properties that they actually have two properties along Tropical Avenue. One is the house where Virgel Aguilar, Imelda Aguilar, it's one of the houses that Imelda or Virgel Aguilar used to keep. And then, one house is called the Ancestral. I don't know if it's really their ancestral house kasi they have a lot of properties, but it's one of the houses that Philemon Aguilar lived in until he passed away. So it's a very old house, as in malaki siya, like 2 blocks yung laki niya, malaki siya. Sobrang dilim pa din ba sa Tropical? Hi Dave, yes, madilim pa rin sa Tropical kasi there are some areas in Tropical that still don't have street lights. So yes, madilim pa rin sa Tropical. Dave is also one of my schoolmates in St. James. Okay. Alright, St. James Parañaque alumni are in full force right now. But anyway, so yes, so one of the houses that they have is called, I don't know kung ancestral house talaga, pero when I was young, ang tawag nila doon, yun yung ancestral house ng mga Aguilar. So I don't know if that's true. But it's a really old house, very beautiful house. Kasi para siyang hotel, as in may facade siya na mahaba, tas may driveway. Yung driveway niya, yung pang movie, yung pang telenovela, as in literally pwedeng may umakyat doon na karwahe tas ibababa sa harapan. Like literally mukha siyang hotel. Kung if you guys know the front of yung Manila Pen or Manila Hotel, yung may pa-curve na driveway, ganun yung style niya. So it's very old, So when I was young, there were still people living there kasi Philemon Aguilar was still alive. But when he passed away, they only use that house pag mga meeting de avance, if there are birthday parties, etc. So it's basically, nobody lives there anymore, just the caretakers. But when Philemon Aguilar was still alive, on one end of the property, on one end of the house, para siyang may office. Kasi nung mayor pa siya, he used to receive guests and people there. So, may office yon, and the office overlooks Tropical Avenue. So, para siyang may veranda or balcony na parang may desk doon, tapos may parang seats doon na minsan, pag tumatanggap siya ng bisita, they can sit there and they can see the entire Tropical Avenue. When Philemon Aguilar was already old, nung medyo sobrang tanda niya, nagkasakit siya, nabaldado siya, like he used to be just in a wheelchair. He would be yung caretakers niya used to bring him to that balcony, and he used to sit there on certain afternoons, and he just watched people pass by. So it became a habit. I think when I was young, yung mga tito ko or tita ko used to point out na, yung Matandang Aguilar nasa balcony. So, he just sit there, he just pass by. I think I don't know kung na-stroke siya or nagkasakit siya. Basta naalala ko siya na, nakaupo lang siya doon. So, when nung namatay na siya, so, since yung mga anak niya nasa ibang bahay na, they closed down the whole house. As in, walang nakatira doon. Like, mornings lang, may caretaker, ayusin yung bahay. But, during the nighttime, nakasarado yung buong bahay. Walang ilaw. People used to say that, kasi wala nga, so as Dave brought it up, Tropical Avenue has certain areas na walang street lamps. And one of the areas that have konti lang yung street lamps is that area, kung nasan yung bahay nila. And on certain evenings daw, if you're walking by that old Aguilar house, you can still see an old man sitting in a wheelchair, looking at you from that balcony, staring at you as you pass by. So, kung may nakita, so if you're walking along Tropical Avenue and you pass by that house, look at the balcony or look at that veranda, and if you see an old man sitting in a wheelchair looking at you as you pass by, that just might be the ghost of Philemon Aguilar. Okay? So yes, that's one of the ghost stories. So most of the ghost stories that I know happen along Tropical Avenue, but well, simply because I live there. So most of the stories that the security guard, or most of the stories that the security guards would tell my uncles or yung mga kasambahay namin is the stories that are along that road. But one of the more popular areas in BF homes na kahit saan ka magpunta, alam mo yung story na to, is the ghosts of Concha Cruz Drive. Okay. So I know you guys know about this. It's very famous actually. It's been published in books. Articles have been written about it. Concha Cruz Drive has been compared to Balete Drive because of the number of appearances. The number of eyewitness accounts or stories that has been told about it. So Concha Cruz Drive is actually it's a very long stretch of road actually. So it stretches from Standard, if you guys know Standard. So fun fact, the reason why it's called Standard is because there used to be a ceramic toilet factory called American Standard that's there. I think nandun pa siya kasi parang I still see a factory on the right hand side Comment below or let me know if it's still there, but I know that it's still there. So it's called American. So the reason why it's called Standard up until now is because it used to have there was a ceramic toilet factory called na ang brand ay American Standard. That was on that line. So kasi kala nila for some weird reason they say parang kaya ba Standard kasi may factory ng Standard electric fan, and I'm like, no. Standard is named after the American Standard ceramic toilet factory, not the Standard electric fan. I was like, what? But anyway, I think I parang lately ata hindi na Standard yung tao, like the young people call that area na as the Village Square. So ako, putang ina, saan yung Village Square? And I'm like, no, yung sa may I'm like, Standard. So alam mo kung gaano katanda na ang mga tao kung ang tawag nila sa dulo ng Concha Cruz ay Standard or the Village Square. Pag the Village Square yan, wala, mga bata pa yan. Pero pag ang tawag nila sa area na yon, Standard, magkaedad tayo, guys. Okay? Miss Viva, nakakakilabot. Maggaganito ka ba ulit? Parang kailangan ko ng alak habang nakikinig. So probably, maybe, we'll talk about other ghost stories. So let me know if you'll be one of the ghost stories that we used to talk about is yung mga call center ghosts. So probably I'll talk about it some other time. Let me know if you guys want to listen to those stories. But yes, hi Margie. Okay. But anyway, so Concha Cruz stretches from Standard, which is along Alabang Zapote Road, up until Elizalde. So it's quite a long stretch siya. So this Concha Cruz Drive is not like Aguirre or President's Avenue or El Grande. It's a private talaga, puro private houses talaga to. There are no businesses along that area. Pero there is a part there na nagbebenta ng mga ng mga plants. So before plantitos or plantitas were a thing, Concha Cruz Drive had a lot of already had a lot of landscaping centers that sold plants. Okay? But yes, majority of the road is private houses siya. And it's not as wide as well. Hindi siya kasing lapad ng Aguirre at Tropical at ano. So, it's just a 2-lane road. And in certain areas, mapuno yung road na yon. But the thing about Concha Cruz Drive, and is probably the reason for this particular ghost story. The reason for Concha Cruz Drive, the thing about Concha Cruz Drive is that for the longest time, during the 80s, wala siyang humps, wala siyang speed bump. Kasi ngayon, di ba, if you live in BF homes or if you live in in any subdivision, most of the subdivisions have speed bumps na, di ba? May mga humps na. Dati nung 1980s, walang speed bumps. As in, walang humps sa BF homes. And one of the areas na one of the noteworthy areas na wala talagang speed bumps is yung Concha Cruz Drive. Kasi number one, walang school doon. Eh, di ba usually kailangan ka, I know na, I don't know if there is a law to it, pero parang it's mandatory that if there's a church or if there is a school, you have to put a speed bump, di ba? Concha Cruz, since it's just full of residential houses, it doesn't really need a speed bump. So, wala siyang speed bump. So, that is the reason why, during the 1980s, there has been stories that it's a good place to go drag racing. Okay? So, drag racing was a thing back then. So, what they do is that they'd start from the end of Concha Cruz, from Elizalde, and then they would race. Kasi one unique feature about Concha Cruz Drive is diretso siya. Diretso siya. Wala siyang curve. Magkakaroon lang siya ng curve actually. I'm Google Mapsing this while I speak. Magkakaroon lang siya ng curve after Honorio after CM Recto. Pero from what the hell? From Laurel to Elizalde, straight yun na road. As in, straight siya na road. Wala siyang bend. So, that is the reason. So, wala siyang speed bump. Wala siyang bend. And, most of the houses there are residential na wala namang kasi usually, sa BF homes kasi, walang pakialamanan. Especially if your house is along a main road. Konti lang yung lumalabas na tao doon. So, because of this, it became a popular spot for drag racing. Okay? Now, as the story goes, as the legend goes, one of the nights that a couple of kids were drag racing, so they started on one end. So they started, I think, so yung drag race route nila is from, I think, was from Laurel papuntang Elizalde. So papunta siya ng Elizalde. Now the end of Concha Cruz in Elizalde has pag tinumbok mo yun, may creek doon. So the story goes is that nung nag-drag racing sila, so they were like very fast, like ano ba ang drag racing, like 0 to 100, like you're probably going more than 100, right? So nung nagda-drag racing sila, nung bandang dulo na, nawalan ng brakes yung isang kotse. Yung kotse na yun had the guy driving, tas kasama niya yung girlfriend niya. Nawalan sila ng brakes. So, dumiretso yung kotse nila sa creek. And namatay sila pareho. So, that happened. Again, I tried to find out if there was any truth to this story. I tried to Google articles, if there were any articles about accidents in Concha Cruz Drive. I wasn't able to find anything at all. Especially nung mga, I was trying to look for articles like, if anything happened in the 1990s or the 1980s about, somebody, about drag racing, about accidents in Concha Cruz Drive, So I wasn't able to find any, but I was able to find parang rumors nga na there was drag racing, but there were no news articles about actual drag racing accidents. So, yun yung story, diba? So, what happened afterwards is that apparently, after that accident where the guy and his girlfriend died, anybody who passes by Concha Cruz would see a car. Ang mangyayari is, so every time you drive by at night, sabi nila, people say if you drive, the stories or differ depende sa kung kanino mo siya nakuha. Some people say that if you drive by Concha Cruz during midnight, some people say if you drive by Concha Cruz during 3 a.m., some people say if you pass by Concha Cruz na umuulan. So any of those three conditions. But they say that if you pass by Concha Cruz either at midnight or 3 a.m. or pag umuulan, there is a black car that will follow you. And then, sobrang didikit yung car sa kotse mo. So of course, if you're driving, right, you'd be annoyed. Like, what the fuck? As in, titikitan ka talaga. So, bubusinahan mo, di ba? So, mangyayari, ditikitan ka lang. Tapos at a certain part, bigla nang tatabi sa'yo yung kotse. Tapos pagtingin mo dun sa kotse, walang nagdadrive. That's the ghost of the Concha Cruz. So if you were driving around along Concha Cruz at midnight or at 3 a.m. or at 2 a.m. or 1 a.m. or if you're driving around along Concha Cruz and it's raining and you're alone, and if a car keeps tagging behind you, and suddenly at a certain part of the road suddenly drives beside you, try to check and see kung may nagda-drive pa, because it could just be the ghosts of Concha Cruz Drive. Okay. Try to check it out if you're going to Suburbia. Okay, that's Concha Cruz. Now, speaking of Concha Cruz Drive, so speaking of talking about the more popular ghosts of BF, I think the most popular one, okay, so there's another version, so from Dave. Wow, Dave, talagang pinursige mo talagang panoodin to. So, according to Dave, who is watching, he says that what I heard is that a car would race you. If you don't beat the car, something bad will happen. Okay, so there's another version apparently. According to Dave, so while you're driving, somebody will force you to race with them. So I don't know how that works. Maybe bubusinahan ka or maybe gigit-gitin ka. And will try to force you to race with them. If hindi ka, or if nalagpasan ka, or if you don't win that race with them, something bad will happen. So, I don't have a, so when you say something bad, will you see the ghost? Will an accident happen to you? Don't know. Basta, when you're driving at Concha Cruz, don't race with anyone, and don't look at the back. Don't ever look beside the black car that drives beside you if you're driving by it. Okay. So anyway, so that's Concha Cruz. Now the last ghost story that I will be talking about BF. I know that there are tons, but this is the last one, guys. I haven't slept yet. I have my period. Masakit ang puson ko, nakatrauma daw ako ngayon. So I'll probably just keep this podcast for an hour, or I'll just finish by 8 m.m. But the last BF Homes ghost story that I'll be talking about is actually one of the most famous crime stories that happened in the Philippines in the 90s. Actually, it was a landmark thing. Like 1990s, if you were born in the 1990s, there are only 3 things that you would remember about the 1990s. Brownout, Mount Pinatubo, Vizconde Massacre. So, the last story that I'll be talking about is the Vizconde Massacre and the ghost of Carmela Vizconde. Okay. So, a lot of you guys probably already know the story of Vizconde Massacre. I know that some of you guys were born after the year 2000, so you only probably know Vizconde Massacre, the Vizconde Massacre from like stories from your parents or from your older siblings. But the Vizconde Massacre was pretty. I grew up watching what happened, the court trials, the investigations, the entire thing. I grew up watching it. So like may mga episodes na they were in TV Patrol, TV Patrol pa ba dati? Oh, tama, TV Patrol. Nolly De Castro had segments about it in Magandang Gabi Bayan. So it was a very big thing. So I know that most of you guys know the Vizconde Massacre story, but let me just go through it, just for, the ones that didn't really live through it. So if your memory is a little bit hazy, or if you don't really know what happened. So the Vizconde, it's called some people call it the Vizconde Massacre or the Vizconde Murders. So according to Wikipedia, the Vizconde murder case, colloquially known or locally known as the Vizconde Massacre, was the multiple homicide of members of the Vizconde family on the 30th of June 1991 at their residence in BF Homes, Parañaque City. Okay? So, Estrelita Vizconde was aged 49, suffered 13 stab wounds. Maria Carmela Vizconde, which was the elder daughter, she was 19. She was only 19, my God. She suffered 17 stab wounds, and she was also raped before she was killed. The younger daughter, Anne Marie Jennifer, who was only 6 years old actually, had 19 stab wounds. So the baby, like Jennifer, the younger child, she had 19 stab wounds. Like, she had the most, more than the mother and the sister. So what happened was that Lauro Vizconde, who Estrelita's husband, and he was the only survivor of that family, was in the U.S. So he was in the United States for I think a business trip when the murders took place. So just a summary of what happened. So the lead suspect on this case was Hubert Webb, who was the son of a very famous man, Freddie Webb. He was a former basketball player. He was also an actor. He was in several series. I think he was in comedy shows. He was in some he was in show parang he was in some comedy shows in Channel 2, if I recall correctly. I don't know if nasa abangan ng susunod na kabanata ba siya dati. Oh my God, I'm so old. I remember that show. I don't know kung anong team si Freddie Webb. Teka nga, i-google natin siya. Anong bang basketball team niya? Wait, let me see. Freddie Webb. Let's see, basketball career. Sa Tanduay. He played with Tanduay. And then, so he was a former and he was tumakbo rin siyang politician, actually. So, Hubert Webb, who's the son of Freddie Webb, was the lead suspect. And the other people that were also accused were Antonio Lejano II, Hospicio Fernandez, Michael Gatchalian, Miguel Rodriguez, Peter Estrada, Joey Fillart, and Artemio Ventura. So, it actually was one of the most sensational cases in the Philippines, being described as a trial of the century. The other defendants were convicted by the Parañaque Regional Trial Court, which the Court of Appeals affirmed. Except for Fillart and Ventura, who had been convicted in absentia, the men were later acquitted by the Supreme Court on the 14th of December 2010 for failure of the process. For failure of the prosecution to prove their guilt beyond reasonable doubt. So if you would notice, the last names of the guys, they were pretty well off. All, like, of course, Hubert Webb is the son of Freddie Webb. So, he's already. Pero yung mga kabarkada niya were like big name families. Lejano, Fernandez, Gatchalian, Rodriguez, Estrada, Filart, Ventura. These were just not ordinary guys. These were guys for good families, guys from like upper middle class to like families talaga who were very rich. So there were a lot of things happened in that case. First, parang at first it was just yung mga suspects were outsiders. Actually, during that time, dun na uso yung mga gates. Kasi before, in BF Homes, you can actually go from one place to another. You can go from one village to another. Kasi, as in bukas yung mga streets. You can pass by one street to another and just go around and without any problems. So, the thing about during that time, so thank you. So, Cholo gave me Hershey's.
Not sponsored.
So this is this is not sponsored, but thank you for the snack. So Cholo came in and gave me a cookie. But anyway, so back then in BF, you can go from one place to another. So the main gates were just the big gates in Lopez, in Standard, in Tropical. So yun yung like big gates talaga. Pero inside, you can actually just go from one village to another. Walang mga gates or anything of that sort. Nauso yung stricter measures ng gates yung na nagkaroon ng gates yung mga smaller subdivisions sa loob because of this Vizconde murders. Because yung unang suspects nila, they said that the murderers were actually outsiders. I don't know if it's a class thing kasi the first people that were suspected by everyone were just yung mga arawan na trabahador that come to the village to work. Kasi syempre, like, well, until naman, hanggang ngayon naman, there are still a lot of day workers, construction workers that go inside BF to, to work on houses or to, as house help, yung mga boy, mga hardinero, ganyan. So, the first suspects were, I don't know if they were construction workers or parang mga trabahador lang sila that work daily. I don't know. So, one of the first suspects were so they were accused. So, I think according to the critics, it was a very it was very classist na parang the first people that they accused kagad were like these, like the poor, na yung mga trabahador, ganyan. Kasi there's parang the first mentality was not to accuse, parang they didn't want to accuse these are like these are guys that come from good families, from good schools. No, they wouldn't be able to do that. So it probably is, those construction workers. So the first suspects, I think it was very there was class distinctions and very very classist yung mga suspect, yung mga inakusahan nila na suspect dati. So yun. So they were arrested and then later they found out that they were innocent. Later on, I think what happened was that, and this is where it becomes hazy, kasi there's a witness that's involved. I forgot her name. Is it Jessica Alfaro? I think. Oh wait, let me just check. Yes. Apparently, one of the friends of the suspects, she confessed that it was these guys that actually murdered the Vizconde family. So parang what they did was like, I don't know kung isa sa kanila type si Carmela or magkakabarkada ba sila. But so one day what they did was that they planned na pasukin yung bahay, and they did that, and then Carmela was raped apparently by Hubert or some others, ganyan. Another thing about this crime, and kaya siya tumagal ng sobrang tagal, was that there was the police that were investigating this massacre. Also, um, there was accusations of bribery, covering up the crime, losing the evidence, and so the policemen were accused of taking money from the families of the suspects, because again, these guys were not just random people. These guys come from good families. So good, like families that are, like, well off. So yun nga, parang it became a circus. Like, there was the suspects' lawyers were trying to discredit the witness, na parang, okay, parang, Jessica Alfaro was like this, you can't really trust her, ganyan, ganyan. So there was some parang issue na they were trying to discredit the witness, ganyan. Tapos parang, I think that there was even a stupid ass rumor na Lauro Vizconde was the one that had his family killed because he already had, parang may kabit siya and he wanted to get rid of his family. It was super fucked up. But at the end, parang at the end kasi parang not all of them were convicted. Parang konti, yung the others na absuelto sila. Parang I think si Hubert and one or two more people lang yung actual na nag-serve ng crime. And it was really funny kasi I think during this time may death sentence pa. Yes, may death sentence, may death penalty pa ata during this time. Meron ba? I forgot. But they were I don't know if na-turn yung result, na-turn yung yung decision ng court na hindi sila ma-death penalty and they just serve parang reclusion perpetua lang sila. So parang life sentence lang. I don't know if Hubert is, kasi this was so long ago. I don't know if Hubert Webb is still in na-acquit na pala siya. Na-acquit na si Hubert Webb, so he's already out. But people are saying that, parang kawawa naman si Hubert Webb kasi, tumanda siya kasi recently lang siya na-acquit eh. Pero parang they're saying na kawawa naman si Hubert Webb. He lost a huge portion of his life sa loob ng kulungan. Kasi when he came in, he was young. He was literally just, I don't know, like his early 20s or he was a teenager or something. And then nung lumalis na siya, he was like so old na. But I think about it is that and that's, I think that crime really showed a dark side of BF homes. Kasi everybody, kasi ang perception kasi is that if you grow up in a rich household, if you went to the good schools, if your family is like this, if you're well bred, you speak English really well, the idea there is that you can't commit a crime like that. Kasi you were raised in a rich family, you were raised in a good family, you went to good schools. And it exposed a really dark side to what was actually happening in BF homes. That inside BF, you have kids doing drugs, you have kids in parties, you have like teenage guys like going around picking up girls, raping them, dropping them off. So it really exposed a super bad side of BF that nobody really knew about, because it's a gated community. It's a posh gated community. How could you think that of its residents, diba? Parang, so it exposed a lot of things in the middle class and upper middle class. But anyway, so ano nangyari yun? Lauro Vizconde kept the house. So he never really sold it. So a lot, I think parang there was some talk before na parang his relatives wanted him to sell the house or at least parang pagiba yung bahay. Kasi, you know, it was so bad. The things that happened in that house was so bad. But Vizconde kept the house as is. Yun yung creepy doon eh. Kasi he didn't change anything. Pinalinis lang yung bahay. They probably cleaned the blood off the walls. They cleaned, you know, pinalitan lang yung mga mattresses. They cleaned the blood on the floor. But everything was the same. He kept the same house that he that he had before he left for America and before his entire family was killed. So that's creepy. Like, yung mga laruan ni Jennifer, like yung mga stuffed toys niya, it's still in the bed. The pictures of you know, the mom and Carmela and Jennifer were still there. All the same furniture was there. He never changed anything about the house. So, during the early 90s, nauso yung mga massacre movies. There was a trend back then that, you know, true crime movies were all in the rage. Like I think it was sila Tony Calvento, if you guys know that show. And sino ba yung director na puro ganun yung pinoproduce niya. So, nauso yung mga ganun. And there was a movie called The Vizconde Massacre movie, I think. Chris Aquino was there. She was Carmela. Ang really creepy thing about that movie is that, of course, it's based on the Vizconde Massacre. The thing about it is that they actually shot the movie inside the real Vizconde house. So, you know, they shot the movie on location talaga. And I used to remember, like, there were interviews about the crew, and even Chris Aquino was interviewed, and she said that there were a lot of funny things happening during the shoot. Like, for example, sorry, I'm eating. For example, yung walls ng bahay nila, they had family photos. There was this family photo of Estrelita, Carmela, and Jennifer, na parang I think Chris Aquino saw na nakatabingi siya. So, parang inayos ata ni Chris. I don't know if it was Chris or another actor, but basta, parang inayos nila yung photo. So, yun, parang nakatabingi siya kasi nakasabit siya, diba? So, inayos nila. Tapos, nung pagbalik niya, nakatabingi na uli. So, inayos niya uli. Kasi parang, you know how it is when your memory plays tricks on you. Nakala mo may ginawa ka, pero you didn't really do it. So, what he did was inayos niya ulit. She goes away. Pagbalik niya, nakatabingi ulit. Same angle. Kinilabutan na siya. Another thing, what happened was that, di ba yung mga stuffed toys ni Jennifer? Yung mga stuffed toys ni Jennifer was the same stuffed toys that she had. As in, walang tinapon. I think, some were just cleaned of blood. Yung talagang sobrang daming dugo talaga, is, I think, tinapon siya. Pero the others, kung pwede pa daw malinis, as in, nilabhan lang, and we're still there. So, Jennifer's stuffed toys, parang nakapile siya sa bed, parang nakaayos siya sa kama nung youngest. So, napapansin nila na there was always this stuffed toy na nasa sahig. As in, nahulog sa sahig. So, the staff, syempre, nakaayos yung bahay, diba? Kasi, you know, if you're part of the production staff, one of the things that you do is you go around the house and you fix things for the shooting. So, one of the production staff saw the stuffed toy fall down the bed. So, ginawa niya, parang kala niya siguro, nalaglag lang. So, she puts it back. Paglagay niya, she only steps back like a foot or two. Pagkatapos niya lagay, nahulog uli. As in, literal na, bumagsak, tas nahulog sa kama. So, parang siya, okay, this is freaky, but you know what? Sige, binalik niya uli. Nahulog uli. And then, she found out later on that stuffed toy was Jennifer's favorite stuffed toy. So, yun. So, sobrang dami nilang kwento during the shooting about like, yung may mga things that get moved, or yung mga kaluskos sa bahay, ganyan. Up until now, Alam ko kasi may caretakers pa rin na pumupunta. When Lauro Vizconde was alive, he would occasionally visit the house. Parang there was actually a time na dun pa siya tumira. And people were advising against it na parang, dude, parang, like, love yourself. Like, this is the house that your family died in. Please don't stay here. So, parang, and then, afterwards, lumipat din siya. Pero he kept the house in pristine condition, like I said earlier. So, usually, caretakers go there during the daytime. But according to a lot of people in the neighborhood, like the guards in the guards in the subdivision, the caretakers don't stay after dark. I mean, you wouldn't pay me I wouldn't accept 5 million pesos to stay there after dark. Not that everything that happened. So, but yun yung kwento ng mga guards na caretakers don't stay there after dark. The guards refuse to pass by that house after dark kasi there are a lot of creepy things that are happening. Now, here are the more... because, of course, the house will have ghost stories if after all that happened. Now, here comes some really creepy stories. Okay? One of the stories that I've heard about the Vizconde Massacre wasn't even a ghost story inside the house. So one of the stories that I heard, I think I heard this from my uncle, and he, as usual, as with most ghost stories, narinig din niya to either sa kabarkada niya who lived in that area, or I don't know, security guard, yung with the usual urban legends and ghost stories. It's one story na napasa from one person to another, etc., etc. But anyway, so as the story goes, in NAIA, in the yung international airport na Ninoy Aquino International Airport, there is a long row of airport taxis doon, di ba? Yung dilaw na taxi. Daw yung fare niya, yung starting fare niya is 75 ba? 150, I forgot. Basta it's the expensive taxi. So in NAIA, there is a taxi. Yung sa taxi lane na yon, there is a girl, one of the taxi drivers, pumapasada siya. So, that taxi driver, is surprised kasi yung pasahero niya sumakay niya is a little girl. Like, literally a child. So, I don't know why he didn't question that there was a child at his, inside his cab. And bakit hindi niya kinwestiyon na that there's a child in his cab. But for some weird reason, hindi niya parang for hindi ata pumasok sa utak niya yun. Basta tinanong lang niya, parang number 1, parang nasan parents mo? Tas number 2, saan ka umuwi? Yun yung tinanong niya dun sa bata. The child says, parang nakatira ako sa BF Homes. So, the driver asks like, okay, saan sa BF Homes? Sabi nung na lang ng child, parang she didn't give an address, but she says like, tuturo ko na lang. Now, I don't know if it's a child or if it's a young woman, pero the story gets a little bit hazy. One version that I heard about this story is that there's a child that comes into the cab and tells the driver to go to this address. And then there's another story of a young woman riding the cab and telling the cab driver to go to this address. So, cab driver, drives, goes in, ganyan. And then, so, binigay na yung address, diba? So, the cab driver parks in front of the house. And then, his passenger, I don't know, if some stories it's a child, some stories it's a young woman. The passenger says na parang, Kuya, wala akong pera. Hintayin niyo na lang ako dito. Kuha akong pera. So, the driver is like, you know how it, diba, na-experience nyo na ba na dati nung hindi pa uso yung Grab na yung umuwi kayo, tas wala kayong pera. So, paghihintayin nyo yung taxi driver while you get money from the house, right? So, parang kala nung taxi driver, ganun lang. So, naghintay siya. hintay siya, parang naka-idle siya. Tapos ang tagal. Tapos nung una, um, so habang naghintay siya, dinaanan siya ng security guard. Nung una, hindi siya pinansin ng security guard. Tapos mga siguro 15-30 minutes na siya naghihintay. Nabalikan na siya ng security guard. Kasi I think nung first time, parang nagro-ronda lang yung security guard. Tapos yung second time na dinaanan siya, yung pabalik na yung security guard. Tinanong siya ng security guard, "Sir, sino pong hinihintay nyo?" Sabi niya, parang, kasi yung pasahero ko, walang pera, so kumuha ng pambayad. Tapos parang tinanong ng security guard, "Sang bahay?" Gumanon siya. Sabi niya, parang tinuro niya yung bahay. And the security guard is like, "Sir, sigurado ka? Hindi ba dito sa bahay na to?" So, the guard points to another house. And he's like, "No, dito sa bahay na po." And the guard is like, "Sir, alam niyo po ba kung kaninong bahay yan?" And then the cab driver goes, "No." And the security guard goes, "Sir, sa mga Vizconde yan." So, apparently, cab driver brings home a young woman or a little girl, depending on the story. Dinrive niya yung pasahero niya sa loob ng bahay, sa loob ng village, dinrop off niya sa bahay ng mga Vizconde, and there was no one that came back. So, if you guys ever drive around BF, and you have a car, or if you pass by one of the villages, alam ko, you really won't be able to accidentally pass by the Vizconde house, kasi it's inside an enclave, or it's inside a smaller village. But if ever you ride a cab driver, or you take the opportunity to ride an airport taxi, try to ask the taxi driver if they've accidentally taken a passenger to BF Homes, and that passenger never came back. Kasi that could be either Jennifer Vizconde or Carmela Vizconde going home to their house. Okay? So, that's the last story that I have for tonight. So, I hope you guys enjoyed the stories. So, there are still a lot of stories in BF. BF Homes has a lot of secrets. Some of them are not ghost stories. Some of them are true crime stories. Behind the really pretty houses in BF, you would hear a lot of suicide stories, murders, etc. So, if you guys have more stories that I can tell, let me know. If you guys want me to talk about other stories in other villages, I have heard that Wakwak, I think, has a lot for some weird reason, but I don't know anyone who lives in Wakwak. So if you guys know, so if you guys want me to talk about other stories, let me know. Okay, but that is it for tonight. I hope that you guys enjoyed all the stories that I talk about, and if ever you pass by BF Homes, try to check and see if whenever you pass by Tropical Avenue, try to check and see if you could hear a woman crying. Sometime, if you drive by and it's raining, try to check and see if you can hear a woman crying in one of the houses. Or if you pass by the old Aguilar house, try to look up the balcony and check and see if the old mayor is sitting there looking at you. Or if you're passing by Tropical Palace, try to listen carefully for the children that's playing in the streets, around the trees. And if ever you are passing by Concha Cruz, don't race with any black cars. Okay? And lastly, if ever you are going to the airport and you see a little girl or a young woman waiting for a taxi, that just might be Jennifer Vizconde or Carmela Vizconde. Okay? Thank you very much for listening in. Have a good night.